All right, guys, time to put on our big boy pants. Time for the big one, the quadratic formula. Tell your parents that term, and they might shiver and be afraid and cry a little bit. It's a big formula. We're going to show you kind of how to break it down and make it a little bit easier to work with. But a lot of what we have been doing so far has been trying to avoid this formula whenever possible. The nice thing is the quadratic formula, which is this great big formula right here, x equals negative b plus and minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. That great big formula will always work in helping you to solve quadratics, even when you can't factor. So this quadratic formula is really for solving any quadratic, even if it can't be factored. Whoops, can't be factored, okay? This will always work. It just comes with a really big formula. Now, I've had students in the past that have gotten really good at using this formula, and they don't even try to factor anymore. They just plug everything into the formula. They've gotten comfortable with it, so they use it every time, which you can do once you kind of get the hang of things. So a couple of things about this formula. So what we're doing is, again, this formula will work always to help you find what your solutions are, your zeros, your x's. What you are looking for is the numbers to plug in. So right here where it says where a, b, and c are, remember a is whatever is in front of your x squared. B is whatever in front of your x. And C is just that constant that's always kind of floating in the background, okay, after everything else. Now, this will work when your equation is written in standard form and it is set equal to 0. Okay, this will work when you're in standard form and it is set equal to 0. So, a couple of things you might notice, this plus and minus, a lot of you haven't seen that before. What that means is this is actually two formulas. You have to do this entire thing once with the plus sign. Then you have to do the whole thing all over again with the minus sign. And I'll show you a few ways to kind of simplify that. But the bottom line is this is technically two formulas, one with a plus, one with a minus, all right? Now, the way that you read this, the reason there's a little quotation or a little voice box here is the way that you would read this formula is x equals the opposite of b. Now, the reason I say the opposite of b, this minus b right here means opposite of whatever b is. If b is a positive, then this is a negative in your formula. But if b is already a negative, you take the opposite of the negative and you use a positive. I'll show you some examples of that. So x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4, whoops, I'm getting ahead of myself. Erase. Where'd you go, eraser? Minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. And this is one that you are going to want to memorize. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay? If you need to hum a little tune, if you need to sing a little song to help you with that, by all means, go for it. But it is something that you are going to have down really well. Okay, so let's try using it. Let's say I have this equation, 4x squared minus x equals 3, and I'm going to use the quadratic formula. I could try factoring first, but we're not doing that today. We're doing the quadratic formula. So step 1 is to set this equation equal to 0. So the way that I do that, 4x squared minus x, this 3 I'm going to minus 3 from both sides. So I get a minus 3 equals 0. Okay, that's step 1. 4x squared minus x minus 3 equals 0. Step 2 says to identify A, B, and C. And it says a little hint here in standard form. They've got to be in order. If these are not in order from the biggest exponent to no exponent, you're going to choose the wrong A, B, and C. So A is right here. A is equal to 4. B is right here in front of the x, and I know you don't see a number. When we don't see that number there, that is a negative 1. If it was a plus x, it would be a positive 1. And then C is my constant right here at the end. Be really careful because that's a negative 3. That minus in front makes it a negative 3. Now the easy part, plug it in, simplify, and solve. So this great big formula, x equals the opposite of b. So since b is a negative 1, the opposite is a positive 1. And then I'm going to plus minus the square root of b squared. So I'm going to put negative 1 squared minus 4 times a, which is 4, times c, which is negative 3. And I would be really careful that you put all of those in parentheses right there. Your a, your b, and your c, make sure they're all in parentheses. And then divided by 2 times a. And the reason you want those parentheses is you just want to make sure that you plug it in your calculator right, or that you multiply correctly. You don't want to accidentally think that this is 4 minus 3. This is 4 times negative 3, okay? So from here to simplify, you have a lot of options. You can simplify all of this piece by piece. You can multiply in your head, or you can use the calculator to help you out. I would recommend don't plug this whole thing in the calculator. Just plug in this part right here. Just plug in what's underneath the square root first. So what I mean is I'm going to change this to 1 plus or minus the square root of something. So I'm going to plug that something into my calculator. Parenthesis negative 1 squared minus 4 parenthesis 4 parenthesis negative 3. Now, because of all these parentheses, it's going to follow the order of operations for me, and I get 49. So I'm going to put a 49 right here. And then all of that is going to get divided by 2 times 4, which is just 8. Now, the nice thing is, I know what the square root of 49 is equal to. This just becomes 1 plus or minus 7 divided by 8. Now, here is where I need to split, okay? Here's where I need to split into 2 different equations. And we're going to actually write these in a different color. One equation is going to use the plus sign. So I'm going to get 1 plus 7 divided by 8, which equals 8 divided by 8, which is just equal to 1. That's one of my solutions. My other one, instead of a plus, I have to use a minus. 1 minus 7 divided by 8 equals negative 6 divided by 8, which simplifies to be negative, what, 3/4? So that would be my other solution. So my 2 solutions are going to be 1 comma negative 3/4. Those would be your answers. So what that means is when you plug those into this equation, you get 0. So remember, we call those zeros sometimes. We call them roots. But let's practice a few more. I know that's a lot. So we're gonna do a few examples. In fact, we're gonna do a whole bunch of examples and use this a couple of times. One thing, and I'm gonna say it over and over again, remember to set the equation equal to 0 first. You've got to do that step. You can't skip it. So right here, I have x squared plus 1 equals 2x. I've got to set it equal to 0. So I need a minus 2x from both sides. And when I do that, I get x squared. I'm going to put my minus 2x in the middle so that I'm written in standard form. And now I'm equal to 0. So if I'm following my steps, a is equal to 1. It's whatever's in front of the x squared. And since there's nothing there, it's like there's a 1. B is equal to -2. And C is equal to +1. Now, when I plug those into my quadratic formula, X equals the opposite of B. So my -2 changes to a +2, plus or minus the square root of -2 squared minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is 1. I'm going to put all of that under my root, all divided by 2 times A, which is 1. These are nice numbers. These are a lot nicer than our example on the other page. So again, you can simplify things in your head. You're welcome to do it in the calculator, but please don't plug this entire thing in, because a lot of times you'll make a mistake, and if you plug too big of a formula in, you don't know where. So what we're going to do is we are just going to plug this part right here. In fact, that part, for future reference, that is called the discriminant. We're going to use that here a little bit later. So we're going to plug that into our calculator. So I'm going to put parenthesis -2, whoops, not negative decimal, -2 squared minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is 1. See, we could have probably done this in our head. And all of that equals 0. Okay, so this becomes X equals plus or, whoops, wow, I'm skipping all kinds of stuff. X equals 2 plus minus the square root of 0, all divided by 2A. Or 2A, wow, 2 times 1, which is 2. So square root of 0, when that happens, the square root of 0 is just 0. So if I split this up into 2, normally this is where we would split, right? And I end up with X equals 2 plus 0 divided by 2, and X equals 2 minus 0 divided by 2. Well, 2 plus 0 is just 2. Divide that by 2 and you get 1. 2 minus 0 is also 2. If I divide that by 2, I get 1. So really, I only have one answer. I just got it 2 different times. So my only answer to this one is X equals 1. And remember, that happens when my parabola comes down and only hits in one spot. It doesn't actually cross my x-axis. It just hits my x-axis. So my one answer is X equals 1. Okay, and that's going to happen every time the discriminant is 0. You're always going to end up with just one answer, because it doesn't matter if you plus or minus, okay? So a little note here to remember, factoring sometimes works to solve quadratics, but this quadratic formula will always, always, always work. So those of you that really don't like to factor, you're going to be able to do this, all right? You're going to be able to use this as a backup. So a couple of notes here, and then we'll get into more examples. Remember that the solutions, which is what we just found, the solutions of the quadratic equation, they're also the x-intercept, and we just looked at that right there on the graph. It's also the x-intercept, and we sometimes call those either roots or zeros, okay? These are 4 different words that all mean the same thing. What are the roots? What are the solutions? What's the x-intercept? What's the zeros? All of those mean the exact same thing, okay? All right, so let's do another problem here. 3x squared minus 2x equals 8. Now, obviously, this doesn't work yet because it equals 8. So I'm going to minus 8 from both sides, and then I'm going to rewrite it. 3x squared minus 2x minus 8 is equal to 0. Now, we're going to do this one 2 different ways. We are going to solve it with the quadratic formula, but we're also going to factor and solve it so you can see we get the same result. So the quadratic formula tells me that A is equal to the 3, B is equal to a -2, and C is equal to a -8. Be really careful not to mess up those signs. So what that means is my quadratic formula, the opposite of B, so instead of a -2, I'm going to put a +2, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so negative 2 squared minus 4, multiplied by a, which is 3, multiplied by c, which is negative 8. And all of that whole thing, including the 2 plus minus, is divided by 2 times a, which is 3. So when I rewrite this, I'm going to go ahead and put the 2 and the plus and minus right here. All over the 2 times 3 is just 6. And then this square part, before I take the square root, I'm going to plug it in my calculator. Negative 2 squared minus 4, parenthesis, 3, parenthesis, parenthesis, negative 8, parenthesis, and I get 100. So that means underneath this square root, I get 100. Well, I know that the square root of 100 is actually 10. So 2 plus or minus 10 all over 6. Now here's where I split, okay? Here's where we split the problem into 2. So let's get a new color here. So I've got 2 plus 10 divided by 6, and I have 2 minus 10 divided by 6. So 2 plus 10 is 12 over 6, which equals 2. So there's one answer. 2 minus 10 is negative 8 over 6, which comes out to be negative 4/3. And I'm okay with improper fractions. I would much rather have negative 4/3 than negative 1 1/3. But right now that looks like it's my solution. That looks like my x's. So in my solution set, I would put 2 comma negative 4/3. All right. Now we could have also done this one by factoring. If I had taken my big X and multiplied the 3 times my negative 8, I would have gotten negative 24. And I need to find 2 factors that add up to negative 2. One's positive, one is negative. So I'm going to go with negative 6 and positive 4 because I know the negative's the bigger one. Those add up to negative 2, multiply to negative 24, but I multiplied by 3, so I got to divide by 3. Okay? So for right now, you're going to think, oh my gosh, he did it wrong, because look, x minus, negative 6 over 3 is a negative 2, so I get x minus 2, and this 4 over 3 becomes 3x plus 4, and those multiply together to equal 0. Now I know that this says x minus 2 and this says that x is 2. Those are the same thing. Remember, this is x minus 2. We have to set it equal to 0, which means that x is 2, which matches my answer right there. And 3x plus 4, I have to set that equal to 0. So I would minus 4, so 3x equals negative 4, divide by 3. X equals negative 4/3, which is my answer I got up here as well. So you're going to get the same answer. You just have multiple ways of solving these now, okay? And the ones that you can't factor, that aren't pretty and don't factor nicely, or they have ugly decimals or fractions, now you can use the quadratic formula to solve those ones as well, all right? Graphing, we've talked about this a whole bunch, but when does our equation equal 0? So when does that 3x squared minus 2x minus 8 equal 0? Well, remember, that's where does it cross the x-axis, okay? So if I look at my picture, if I'm using this problem right here, it crosses the x-axis at 2. So 1, 2, I would say that's correct. And it crosses at negative 4/3, which is a little bit more than negative 1. So that right there looks like negative 4/3 to me. So that's what my graph would look like. And remember, we also call those roots or zeros. So my roots or my zeros would be 2 comma negative 4/3. Those would be my zeros and my roots. All right. Okay, a couple more examples. And we'll get a little bit more room here to write. You're welcome to use another piece of paper. It wouldn't hurt to have these examples in your notes. 6x squared minus 5x equals 7. It needs to equal 0. So I'm going to minus 7 from both sides. So I get 6x squared minus 5x minus 7 equals 0. So here's my a, here's my B, here's my C. So x equals the opposite of B. So instead of a -5, I'm going to put a +5 plus or minus the square root of B squared. So -5 squared minus 4, parenthesis A, which is 6, and C, which is -7. All of that is over 2 times A, which is 6. So when I simplify that, I get 5 plus or minus. On the bottom, I get 12 square root. I'm not even going to try to do that one in my head right now. I'm going to do -5 squared minus 4, parenthesis 6, parenthesis, -7, parenthesis. And that becomes the square root of 193. That's not a pretty number. I can tell you right now that is actually going to be that's a prime number, which means there is no square root of 193. So what my answer is going to look like, this is as simple as it gets, and I'm okay with that. My answer, x can equal 5 plus the square root of 193, all divided by 12, the whole thing divided by 12. And x also equals 5 minus the square root of 193, all divided by 12. So those are my two answers. And since this doesn't become a nice number, I'm okay with it looking that way. I like this answer. I like it a lot more than I would like a decimal, which is one of the benefits of not plugging the entire equation into your calculator, because it's going to give you an ugly decimal and you don't know where or why. This is why, because we don't know what the square root of 193 is. It's not a pretty number. Okay. Second example, 9x squared plus 12x plus 4. You are more than welcome to try and factor that one if you want, but this video is about the quadratic formula. So this is my A, this is my B, this is my C. And I think this is the first time our B was a positive, which means when I write my quadratic formula, since I take the opposite of B, I'm going to make this -12 plus or minus square root 12 squared minus 4, parenthesis A, parenthesis C, all over 2 times A, which is 9. So that is going to simplify to be -12 plus or minus. On the bottom is an 18. My square root, let's see what happens on the inside. This is looking like it might be, this is the other reason why I like to find the square root first, because I have a feeling we are going to get a number we're not usually very happy to get. Nope, this one just gives us 0. Hey, we did one of those already. I thought we were going to end up in the negatives, but we end up right at 0, which makes sense because 2 times 3 is, okay, 4 times 3 is 12 and 4 times 3 is 12. I should have seen that one. So what we end up with is -12 plus or minus 0 over 18, which plus minus 0 gets you the same thing. So all we have to find is -12 divided by 18. Remember, if my discriminant, this number right here, if my discriminant is just 0, there's only one answer. Okay. So -12 over 18 simplify to be -2/3. I think I've been recording videos too long today, guys. So -2/3 is my only solution. It's my root, it's my 0, it is my x-intercept, which means my graph, if this is 1 and this is 2, -2/3 is right about here. And that's where I'm going to touch the x-axis, but I'm not going to cross it. I'm just going to touch it in that one spot. Okay. All right, let's give this one a try. It's already set equal to 0. Here's my A, here's my B, here's my C. So -B, or opposite of B, since this is a +4, I get -4 plus or minus the square root of 4 squared minus 4 times A, which is -2, times C, which is -7, all over, oh, I better put my x equals, all over 2 times -2. Now, I know some of you in your head are like, oh my gosh, quit writing it. Just put 4 squared is 16. Quit putting 2 times -2 and just write -4. You're welcome to do so. I like to write them all down first, because if I make a mistake, I can see where I made the mistake. If I plugged in the wrong number or did bad math in my head, I can find where I did that mistake. So I'm going to write it out like this. And then I'm going to rewrite it. -4 plus or minus the square root of something, all divided by 2 times -2 is -4. Now let's put that in our square root. 4 squared minus 4 times -2. Oh, it's going to happen on this one. Times -7. Look what happens when I hit enter. I get a negative number. A lot of you are thinking, oh, no big deal. You can do negative numbers. But if I try to take the square root of -40, it says error, non-real answers. It doesn't say there's not an answer. It says there's non-real answers. So what this means is that there are no real solutions. There are, in fact, fake, made-up, pretend solutions, but there's not any real solutions. And we're going to talk about the imaginary. They're called imaginary solutions. Imaginary. That so does not look right, but we're going to pretend. There are imaginary solutions. We're going to make up some crap next time. We can't take the square root of a negative, so we don't give up. Instead, we just pretend like you can, and we invent a number that lets us do it. As of today, your answer is there are no real solutions. We'll teach you next time how to find the unreal solutions, the imaginary, the fake solutions. But for now, because that's a negative, there's nothing I can do at this point. There's no real solutions. We'll worry about the rest next time. All right. So you should be working on homework. What are we on at this point? Homework 9C. Holy cow, I can't believe we're already on homework 9. That means one more and then the test. So homework 9C. Do as much as you can at home. What you don't get done or what you get stuck on, bring to class. I'll answer questions in class, and we'll work on 9AB as a class together. We'll see you then.